Morning Majority on 630.
6:37 on WMAL Morning Majority. Brian Neiman, Byron York from the Washington Examiner in this morning. And we're pleased to be joined by Michael Totten in studio, war correspondent, foreign affairs reporter, and he's also written a new book called The Road to Fatima Gate. It's all about Lebanon. We talk a lot about Libya these days, Syria, everywhere else in the Middle East, but Lebanon kind of gets lost in it. You wrote a book about Lebanon, which was at one point we thought of as, hey, this is the place, this is the example of how democracy can flourish in the Middle East. Are you bullish or bearish on the future of Lebanon?
Well, I have to say bearish. In 2005, when I first went to Beirut, it reminded me of Berlin in 1989. Mm-hmm. But slowly, over the last couple of years, Syria and Iran have been able to reconquer the country through their proxy militia, Hezbollah. And Beirut, as it turned out, in 2005, was really more like Budapest in 1956.
So, Fatima Gate, what is Fatima Gate?
Fatima Gate is an old border crossing on the Lebanese-Israeli border. And the significance of the Lebanese-Israeli border today is that because Hezbollah controls the Lebanese side of it, and because it is controlled by Iran primarily, the Lebanese-Israeli border has become the front line in the Arab-Israeli conflict, in the Iranian-Israeli conflict, and also in Iran's confrontation with the West in general.
And it is ruled by Hezbollah.
That's right.
And if that portion is ruled by Hezbollah, how much of the other portion is ruled? Who controls Lebanon today?
Nobody really controls Lebanon because it's fractured, and it has been fractured ever since it's become an independent republic. So you've got the ostensible government, which carries out the day-to-day operations of government like anywhere else, except it doesn't control anything, not even trash collection, let alone policing, in the parts of the country that Hezbollah rules. And Hezbollah controls the country's foreign policy.
What do the people want?
Depends on who you ask. Think of Lebanon as divided into threes. You've got roughly 1/3 is Christian,
right,
1/3 is Sunni Muslim, and the other third is Shia Muslim. And the majority of the Shias support Hezbollah, the resistance against the Zionist entity, and resistance against the West in general.
So I guess a larger question would be that if Lebanon, where you have a third Christian, at least a third Christian, or 30 to 40%, whatever it is, and if you can't get democracy in Lebanon, can you get a true form of democracy that can make the United States happy anywhere in the Middle East?
The only place that I'm optimistic that's going to be democratic anytime soon is Tunisia.
Really?
Yeah, Tunisia is a lot like Lebanon in as so far as how advanced it is compared to a lot of the rest of the Arab countries and how Western oriented it is, except that it's 99% Sunni Muslim. There is no sectarian divisions setting the country against itself. And Tunisia doesn't have neighbors like Syria and Iran, which are mucking around inside and trying to subvert the country and yank it into an orbit that it doesn't necessarily want to be in.
Well, switching to another country I guess you are bearish on, which is Libya, you have this new op-ed today coming out from President Obama, Sarkozy, and David Cameron saying that it's absolutely, totally essential that Muammar Gaddafi leave, and then they don't say what they're going to do to make that happen. I mean, what's going to be done about this dilemma at the bottom of the Libya policy, which is Gaddafi's got to go, but we're not going to get rid of him?
I think it's totally bizarre to say, okay, we've got to get rid of him, but we're not going to get rid of him. I mean, I don't know how they expect the rebels to get rid of him, because the rebels are disorganized and untrained. They don't seem to really know what they're doing. They don't seem to have any kind of cohesive leadership structure. So unless NATO is going to get rid of Gaddafi, he seems perfectly determined to just dig in and fight as long as he needs to. I mean, especially if we say we're not targeting him, then he has no incentive to surrender.
Right. We've specifically announced that we're not targeting. But
right.
But if we did target him, if we did take him out, it's reasonable to ask, then what do you do then? It's the you broke it, you own it thing, isn't it?
Well, no, I don't think any of us want to go there. On the left, the right, the center, in Europe or America, nobody wants to own Libya and occupy it or do any kind of nation building, not after Iraq.
But if you militarily come in and take out the head of state, what do you do?
Well, I mean, there's nothing to stop us from killing him and leaving, is there? But it doesn't. I mean, I think that would be fine personally. If that's what we did, I wouldn't have any objection.
But we've talked about what a mess the rebels are. I mean, who's in charge at that point?
Nobody.
Do you know enough?
That's not an optimum situation, is it?
No, it's not an optimum situation.
Is there anything you're optimistic about when it comes to the Middle East right now?
Yeah, Tunisia.
Tunisia. Okay,
yeah, that's it.
The Arab Spring that we're seeing right now, how much of that is real, of people in these countries, the youth wanting to have a more Western idea of life and wanting freedom, wanting to have a government, a secular government, and how much of it is the mosques and the mullahs, pushing these people out on the street to maybe even have a more of an Islamist regime in their country?
Well, it's both, and in each country you're going to get a different mix. One of the reasons that I'm optimistic about Tunisia is because the Islamists there are very weak, and democratic-minded citizens are the majority of the country. Where in Egypt it's the reverse. I mean, I know Egyptian liberals. I mean, use liberal in the general sense of the word, who think more or less like we do and would want for Egypt what we would hope to see come about in Egypt. And I've asked them, so how many people in the country agree with you and think like you? And they say 5 to 10%, and that's very discouraging.
In Egypt, we seem to have put all of our faith in the army as this stable, middle-class institution that can keep things under control. Is that well-placed?
Probably. I mean, the army is less ideological than it used to be, and more professional than it used to be, and it is a stabilizing force. And I mean, I don't personally want to see Egypt remain something like a military dictatorship, but it's better, I think, to have the army in Egypt play a role somewhat like the army in Turkey used to, where it was a fairly non-ideological check on political extremism that stepped in when it had to, and otherwise stepped out of the way and let the country govern itself. I don't think we're going to see that in Egypt, but the closer we can get to that ideal, the better.
That's Michael Totten, foreign correspondent for Pajama Media. He's also written a new book called The Road to Fatima Gates, all about Lebanon.
630 WMAL.
650 WMAL. Brian Neiman, Byron York from the Washington Examiner this morning. Michael Totten is joining us in studio. He's written a book called The Road to Fatima Gates about Lebanon. Syria, how much control does Iran have on Syria, and how much control does Syria have on Lebanon?
Syria has a lot more control over Lebanon than Iran has over Syria.
Okay.
Iran's not really trying to control Syria because the two countries are allies. They're very close allies, and they have been for decades. And so it's not a matter so much of one dominating the other, although Syria is clearly the junior partner in the relationship. Whereas Lebanon, Syria has been bribing and bullying Lebanese officials for decades, and they dominate the country partly by they'll approach a Lebanese member of parliament and say, hey, we'll give you a big cut in this corruption scheme if you'll work with us, or maybe we could car bomb you if you don't want to cooperate. So you want money or you want to get killed.
Yeah, that's a tough call.
Yeah.
A question that Brian asked you in the break, which is pretty fascinating. When you talk about Iran and democratic movements in Iran, and we hear so much about the Iranian street that the people really do want this, but you have this repressive leadership. I mean, is that the case? What kind of government would you have if you had an actual democracy there?
I think that of all the countries in the Middle East, again, except Tunisia is a bit of an exception, but compared to, let's just forget Tunisia for a minute, look at all the other Arab countries. Well, Iran is not an Arab country and has a much, much better hope for having a normal, high-functioning Western-style democracy if they can get rid of this government. For a couple of reasons. One, because Persian civilization is just, I mean, let's just be honest here, it's more advanced than Arab civilization, and it always has been. And two, you've got...
Even with the mullahs having control for so long?
Yeah, well, I'm not talking about the governments here. Right. I mean, the government in Iran is extremely retrograde and reactionary and violent and terrible. But that doesn't mean that it's a fair reflection of Persian civilization. I mean, look at Germany in the 1930s. I mean, its government was as bad as the government's ever been in the world. But Germany was nevertheless in a very advanced society, despite the government. And despite the fact that the Nazi government had support from a significant percentage of the German population. So, I mean, the revolution in 1979 that overthrew the Shah in Iran, there were three factions. There were the radical Islamists led by Khomeini. There was a large radical leftist faction and a large liberal faction. And those three battled it out for power after the Shah was overthrown, and the Islamists won. But there's very large chunks of Iranian society, the liberals and the left, still exist, and the appeal of the Islamists has been greatly diminished.
But how did they ultimately get rid of this government, which has been in place for, what, 32 years now?
I don't know.
Not without our help, I would imagine.
I don't think that they're going to be able to do it without helping the immediate future. No.
What does
unless they do what the Libyan rebels have done and actually pick up a rifle and shoot at the government.
What does help mean as far as the United States?
Well,
CIA bombs, troops on the
know.
ground. That's the only way to have it actually happen.
That would work. That doesn't mean that's a good idea,
right?
But that would certainly work.
Michael, good to have you in the studio. Thanks very much for coming here. And the book is called The Road to Fatima Gates, all about the Lebanese.